Honestly, I'm a dressage rider, and I have horses in training at any given time from literally the beginning of backing all the way to Grand Prix. And I have all of my USDF medals and freestyle bars. So if you ever have burning questions about freestyles, about showing, about the differences in the levels, I would love to help answer your questions in regards to that stuff too. But tonight we were talking about the rider's seat in Canter. And my husband said, that seems oddly specific. I said, well, that's what happens when you're open to suggestions. I ask people what they would, but then the more I thought about it, I thought it's a really good topic.
It's sort of a big topic.
It's sort of a big topic. Yeah, there's a lot to it. I think that there's a lot to discuss because the canter is really, really fun, but it also can be especially challenging in its own way. It's where some of the fanciest dressage movements are, and it's also where the horse and rider can really struggle to get balanced and get some control. The canter is a complex gait because it's asymmetrical, which means it has almost a twisting quality to one side or the other, and because it has a moment of suspension. And in the canter, as opposed to the trot, the rider has a special opportunity during that moment of suspension to change the balance of the horse. And that's going to be a lot of what we're talking about today, is what can we do in that moment of suspension? What is the opportunity for influence? The moment of suspension is when the horse is in the air, and the special moment for the rider is when both hind legs are off the ground and are coming under the horse's hip. That is the moment that the rider can use their seat to bring the horse's hind legs further under the belly, closer to the center of mass, shifting more of the weight onto the hind legs. This is the engagement that's required for canter walk transitions, for collection, for flying changes, and canter pirouettes. Or, if you don't want to do all of that, if you work on further engaging the hind legs, it can give you a more just pleasant and balanced canter that's easier to ride. However, in order to seize this moment of opportunity to balance the canter, engage the hind legs, and sow the seeds for future collection, the rider has to have really good control over their position and be aware of the right timing, posture, and use of self. And hence our topic tonight, the rider's seat in canter. I think it'd be helpful to take a moment to compare the rider's seat in trot to the rider's seat in canter. In trot, the path of the rider's seat through space is different than the path in canter. In trot, the rider's body is more or less in a vertical line. The hips and shoulders stay in alignment, and the body moves in an up and down fashion, sort of as if we were hopping on a pogo stick. There you go. So you have to stay, a bit stiff, bouncing up and down. All right, so the hips have to be flexible, but if we were to imagine the trot making a line on a seismograph, the waves would be smaller and shorter than in the canter. The horse's top line remains pretty level. It's not rocking. Also, the energy moving forward in the trot is in pretty regular, even packets of energy, which means the rider can push fairly steadily. The rhythm of trot is fairly staccato. The average trot clocks in at 140 to 160 beats per minute, so that's kind of a lot. When people are working on their sitting trot with me and they say, oh, is it always this bouncy? I say, yes. The trot is bouncy. It's just the way that God made the trot. Occasionally you'll meet a horse who has a soft trot, but the truth is we're going up and down at 140 to 160 beats per minute. It's quite the pogo stick. In the canter, the horse is also moving like a sine wave through space, but the waves are longer and higher. The horse rocks up and down like a boat. First one end lifts, and then the other as the horse rotates around its center of gravity. This rocking action lifts the rider up smoothly, so that's why it's usually easier to sit than the canter. It's also easier to sit because the tempo of the canter is significantly slower. Canter usually has around 101 to 116 beats per minute, so far less than 160. However, the greater range of motion of the canter is more demanding of the rider's hips. So novice riders can end up compensating with other parts of their body, and that's also something that we're going to talk about today. Canter is also special because it has a climbing feeling in the front when the horse's hind end is curling under, so inexperienced riders can actually get their first feelings of collection or at least engagement in the canter. It's just a little window into the further development of that balance. So let's get a little deeper into the specifics of the rider's seat in canter. So let's agree that the rider is in a classically correct stance-like position. We're not in 2-point, We're not in a half seat, no hunter or jumper style riding in this case. The back is straight, the shoulders are strong and aligned with the hip and the heel. The thighs are turned in and the toes are pointed straight forward. Keeping the thighs on the horse is important because we need to hold ourselves in the saddle with the wishbone shape of our seat and thigh. So the seat is really from your ribs to your knee. But in this case, when we're talking about the wishbone shape of the seat and thigh, we mean from your knee all the way up to your pelvis and down the other side. That's your entire seat that you want to have in contact with the horse. We want to take advantage of the fact that the femur is the longest and thickest bone in the body, and it has a great capacity to keep our seat in good contact with the saddle. Sally Swift of Centered Riding always said, ride your bones. And it's interesting how you hear something 25 years ago, and then the more that you learn about riding, you're like, oh, that's really interesting. It's even more relevant than I thought it was, as you get to know more and you bring your own knowledge to it. We also need to agree with all the classical masters who say that the glute muscles must stay soft, that we sit in the saddle like a hen nestling on her egg. I do a lot of reading before my lectures. I look at different books. I'm looking for quotes that will be applicable, whatever. And so everyone says, they say the buttocks, because these are older books, will say the glutes must stay soft. The buttocks must stay soft over and over again. So I guess they really meant it, and they are right. We don't want to scrunch the buns when we swing the seat. That's because this causes the back to round out, and it can cause the leg to drop up because you're engaging the wrong muscle groups. This shortens the lever of the rider's body. So everything about influencing the horse is about having a long, stiff lever. It's really physics that we're engaging here when we're trying to swing the horse under. So keep in mind that for a lever of any size to function, it has to be stiff. So imagine a shovel, for example. If a shovel were made of soft rubber, it wouldn't be very effective. The rider's waist cannot be soft, and the shoulders can't rock too much back and forth in the canter. So this all kind of goes along with too much scooping or scrunching of the buns, that the lever gets soft or it gets truncated, and you have a lot less influence than if you're stiff all the way, the whole column of your spine.
I'm sorry,
No,
I'm going to interrupt you, but
Okay.
again, when you say stiff, how can you do that and be stiff and not tight?
Well, all will be
Are you
revealed.
gonna-
All will be revealed. But so the truth is that, so in the beginning, it's very, very important that the rider have total control over their position in order to have influence. So in the beginning, you may feel a little stiff, you may feel a little tight, but suppleness is the result of riding in the correct position for a very long time.
And
So-
every time.
And every time, so that you train the correct muscles. So the parts that need to hold still learn to hold still,
Yeah.
so they're not giving mixed messages or undermining your efforts, right? Sometimes if some part of it's flopping around, and again I'll explain this more later, you could be giving a conflicting message to the horse. So in the beginning, sometimes people do feel too stiff when they ride. But if we're not stiff, we don't have control over our tools. And that's number one, is just get control of yourself, then try to influence the horse.
Okay.
So not all parts of the body are movable when we ride. We're usually pretty still from here to here, right? As I can't remember who said this, but they said there is no waist joint in riding. So we're stiff, again, from the seat is the meat of the ribs. So really from here all the way to here, we're not moving. Then we get to the big ball and socket joints in the pelvis. Those are the ones that move. And it's hard to learn to isolate those. It's true, it's a real challenge, because what other things do we do in our life, unless you're a salsa dancer, to really rotate the ball and socket joints a lot? So anyway, so good question. And I don't deny that it feels stiff at the beginning. Okay, and I'm going to go on and say, I don't want you to misunderstand me. The rider's seat is not hard and driving at all phases of the stride, because that would make the horse gallopy and stiff. If you push too much all the time, you could be chasing the horse off its feet. The constant pressure also will drive the horse's back down and flatten the gaits, but neither is the seat simply softly following all the time. In that case, we would be stuck with whatever gait the horse naturally gave us. How would we begin to rebalance the gait, to shape it, and prepare the hind legs to carry more weight if we don't first get control over our tools and make some effort at influencing the gait? That's the problem with the following seat, is it's just a following seat. You'll never be able to change the horse. Some of the common problems in the rider's seat and canter, and I think that will help answer some of the other questions as well. So on our little handout right here, there's a cute little stick figure drawing at the bottom from Charles Harris, who was a remarkable person. He was an Englishman who I believe went to the Spanish riding school. I think he was one of the first English people to ever visit there and take lessons. And he was there, I believe, as an English instructor to the chief rider of the Spanish riding school. Anyway, so he was there for years, and he made all these wonderful doodles from his lessons. And they apply to everything. He talks about what people should eat for breakfast. 1 egg and 1 piece of toast if you're going to go sit the trot, nothing more. He talks about what kind of breeches you should have, because he has this terrible experience where his breeches aren't tailored right and he gets rubbed very badly. And he goes on then all the way to Piaf and all these flying changes. And anyway, so here we have good, so bad. You can see here that the person is hinging at the hips, and then they are hinging too far back at the hips. Here we have a person in good alignment, and they are bracing their back, and they're pushing with the back and the core in order to canter. So I included in here, there. So in the canter, because the rider's seat is hinging at the hip joint, it's very easy to swing the shoulders in compensation or jerk them unintentionally in a reciprocal whipping motion. So let's say that you're trying, Rose is telling you to swing your hips, and you're trying as hard as you can, but then every time you push your hips forward, your shoulders fly back. And then every time that happens, you accidentally pull on the rein and you're chopping off the stride.
I'd never do that.
No one here does that ever. I've all seen you ride, seen all of you ride. If the shoulder has a whipping motion, it's because the rider is swinging the hips forward, but the abs aren't strong enough to keep the body in a straight line. So the shoulders go backwards as the hips go forward, and that's when the rider accidentally tugs on the rein. The other time the shoulders move too much is when the rider isn't flexible enough in the hip or strong enough in the lower back. So the rider tries to push with the hip, but the hip isn't mobile, so the upper body falls forward, right? And I certainly have been there plenty of times. I'm coming up to my pirouette, I start pushing, but then I start pushing here, and I'm not pushing through here. Okay. Or the quads and the hip flexors contract and involuntarily pull the upper body forward. So we know that the muscles have an insertion point and attachment point, but the hip flexors can either pull the leg up to the hip, or they can pull the hip down to the leg. So sometimes the body's just getting a little bit confused. A large muscle group tries to help, and then we get out of alignment. So that's really common as well. When the hip flexors tip the pelvis forward, it's like spilling a bucket of water as the torso comes forward. So I often tell people to imagine that their pelvis is like a bucket of water, and while they're riding, try not to spill the bucket backwards, and try not to spill the bucket forwards. Nice and level. So in the canter, the rider's hips are required to open more, to handle a greater range of motion, and swing without the upper body whipping around. The rider has to swing the horse. The horse does not get to rock the rider like the mast of a ship swaying in a storm. So that's really has proven to be helpful. Thank
Allegory,
you.
yeah.
Yes, when I'm teaching people is that the rider grabs the saddle and swings the horse. The horse should not be swinging the rider. So on the other end of the common problem scale, we have stiffness over here, is that sometimes when riders try to accommodate for this greater range of motion, they collapse into a kind of softness, right? So, and that's often where maybe the instructor says, just relax, just go with the motion. And so then you see someone kind of rounding their back or rounding their shoulders and just being like, okay, I'm just gonna go with it. So this often makes the
That's
this roll. It often makes the rider more comfortable, okay? Because they're absorbing all of that movement up here in the curve of their spine, so it makes them more comfortable on the horse.
But it falls apart very quickly because there's no control.
Amen.
Okay.
Yes. So this, she said, the next thing I want to say is, this makes the rider's position totally ineffective.
In other words.
Yes. And loose to the point of zero influence on the horse. You can't determine what kind of canter you get when you are loose. Lastly, the rider may have a chair seat in the canter. And this one's a little bit harder to see, but it really affects the horse and the horse's performance. So this person may look like they have quite a nice stiff back in the canter, and they're very straight up here. but their lower leg is a little forward, and they're sitting fairly heavily on their buns, okay? So it can look decent in regards to the upper body, but the knee is stiff and the foot is out in front. The rider's leg has to be kept under the rider's body, the hip, heel, shoulder alignment, in order to distribute the impact of the rider's weight dropping onto the horse. So when we sit in the classical stance-like position and we're dropping onto the horse, we're keeping the wishbone of our thigh on the horse, we're distributing our weight and our impact over a greater surface area. This is just like what a saddle does versus riding bareback. When you ride bareback, all of our weight is on whatever the surface area of our buns are in the middle of the horse. When we put a saddle on, it spreads the weight out. It's much more comfortable for the horse. So the way that we sit on the saddle can have the same effect. If we sit back in the cantle with our leg a little in front of us, our hips can be too heavy and too much pressing down in one small area, versus in the classical stance-like position, you're distributing your weight over the thigh. So when the person is in a little bit of a chair seat in the canter, they can be causing the horse's back to stiffen. So they may have a nice stiff back, they might be pushing, but they're just have too much weight pressing down in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we call that driving the horse's back down, because in canter, we'd like the horse's top line to become rounder as the hind end swings under like the tail of a dolphin. And again, that's why it's important to keep the thighs strong and flexible and the legs well under the rider's body. Okay, so now we talked about common faults. And this brings me to one of the most important concepts in canter that I believe an instructor can teach. And this is assuming that you and your horse can canter. Okay. Well, you know, because because that's like a little bit more like backing up a couple steps. So let's say that you've gotten to the point where you and Sensei are cantering, you can on the circle, you can steer, she's not running off with you, etc. Okay. So this is to control the tempo of the canter with the hips, and not just riding from the calves to the reins and back again. This means that if the tempo of the canter starts to slow down, the rider pushes it back up with the seat. The instructor must be vigilant and not allow the students to collapse when they start losing the tempo. The rider will have to speed up the action of the hips to get back into sync with the stride, and then continue to control the tempo with the stride. The rider does not have to drive every stride, but they do need to ride every stride. The rider does not have a following seat. The rider has a directive, authoritative seat, like the person leading in a partner dance. Someone has to guide the tempo, speed, and direction. At our barn, we always use the metaphor of the seat as the conductor of the orchestra. So the seat holds the tempo, the baseline beat for the whole group, and then the lower legs and the hands can pipe up or solo whenever is needed. But it's really important that if the person does feel like they are losing the canter, that they don't just, sit back and crunch and just squeeze or just tap the whip or fall forward.
God, who does that?
Who does
Oh
that?
my God.
That the person, they sit down and they try hard to swing the hips. They try to get back into sync and to get the horse to answer the hips.
So,
So I don't think it'll surprise you when I say that the only way to control the rhythm with the seat rather than the calves is to master position. The effective position is a highly controlled one with good balance, even at the risk of stiffness in the beginning. So you've got to hold yourself in balance, you've got to get control of your body parts. Okay, so now I'm going to do my stool demo, just very simple, but I'll show you. Let's see here, I think I'll just do it here. Okay, so the stool is a quadruped, all right, so it has hind legs. All right, so let's just talk about how we're using the seat in canter. So I know my legs are a little bit in front here, but don't crucify me for not being in position. Okay, so if I keep my body nice and stiff and I push down and I bring my hips forward and my abs are flexing, I can influence the hind end of the stool. Now I realize the hind end is coming up because it's not a horse, okay? But the whole point is that I'm pulling forward, my legs aren't doing anything, I'm pulling forward with my core, okay? And I'm having some influence on the horse, because this is stiff. I can feel it from my armpits all the way down through the front of my abs. I can feel it a little bit in my upper back because it's preventing me from going like this, right? So my abs are tightening to press my body forward. If I didn't hold my shoulders back, this is what would happen. That, right? Because I'm like engaging my abs to pull myself forward, but I've got to use my opposing muscle groups in the upper back. Now, let's see if I can influence the hind legs of the horse if I just scrunch my buns. the stool, right, didn't
Right.
influence hind legs, okay. Now, then there's that thing, I think this is a little too small because it's Paul's stool, but like if the old saying about polishing the saddle, you know, if you're
Yeah,
sliding,
like,
okay,
yeah.
so same thing, can't really get the hind legs off the ground. So again, it's holding again, my pelvis is straight, so I'm not spilling the bucket forward. So let's say that I tried to, fall this again, but, so now I'm gonna try to push here. Okay, I'm pushing with my upper body. Am I influencing the hind legs? They're not coming off the ground. Okay, so same thing. Okay, I'm scrunching, they're not coming off the ground. Now, I'm gonna hold myself really rigid, like a plank exercise, and I'm just gonna press forward here. Okay? And that's what brings the hind legs off the ground.
That's very cool. That's very
Are
cool.
we all gonna have a chance?
You certainly can afterwards. Yes, this will be first you have to have 3 glasses of wine. Just drink a half a bottle of wine and then try that.
Your legs are not even gonna touch the ground.
So we're gonna be like this.
Experimenting with that on your bar stools at home?
Yes.
Yeah. okay.
Yeah, absolutely, because
Okay.
it's
Very short
really
course.
it's really similar. You feel your entire core engage, and you have to hold yourself a bit stiffly to pull that forward. Otherwise, you tip over, or the hind legs don't come off the ground.
Can you do that on the bouncy ball too? Or is that's probably too easy to
No,
move
because I
that
think
forward?
the ball, you need the resistance of the chair.
Gotcha.
The
yeah.
ball would just roll.
Roll with you.
Yeah, I think it
Okay.
would. It
So
wouldn't
really,
really.
you're not really using your legs at all to get your horse forward.
Well,
then.
sometimes you may need to squeeze your horse forward. It's
Okay,
true.
but-
So if you're
But
swinging,
really, to keep the horse in motion, once you're there, it's all.
you're trying to
it's-
use your hips. Yeah, and the thighs. Again, we're gonna have a long discussion on the thighs
Okay.
because they are really important because they do hold you in the saddle and they help transfer that energy down there.
Yeah.
So we're gonna discuss that. But we're trying to literally use the hips. I mean, that's where we're going with this. Okay. Let's see here.
Sorry.
Now we're talking about thighs. Okay, good. Actually, that's what comes next. You guys are really helpful. You're like flowing right along with the lecture. Okay, so the rider must try to push the canter with a stiff midsection and to keep the hips down in contact for as much of the stride as possible. This is where the gentle grip of the long inner thigh muscles, the adductors, come into play. I like to give this example of how much grip a person has with their thighs when they're riding. Okay, so first of all, we have to start by saying that the toes and knees are pointed straight forward, okay? So that we're using these long muscles, a little bit of the hamstring. We're not riding like cowboys out here, right? And it's impossible really to ride like this. So it's important that you're keeping everything pointed forward so you have this long flat surface. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much thigh do I have on my horse? Let's say that 1 is like the cowboy and 10 is like I'm being bucked off, okay? And you're holding on as hard as you can. I'm saying like I got a 3. I got a 3. If I put a $100 bill under your knee, shouldn't drop it. So I like to call it a gently adhesive thigh. And one of the things that the thigh has to learn is that when you close it, it pulls you down. So it's really common when people are first learning that they pinch their thighs and they go up.
Yes.
Yeah, totally common.
That's me.
Everybody does it. And that's just a muscular coordination thing. It's just practice that you got to tell your muscles, no, I didn't mean pinch and go up, like, ooh, it's cold. I mean,
It's a chicken.
pull myself down,
Yeah.
right? So again, and that's just practice. And you can do that at any gait. You can do it in downward transitions. Just noticing, like lots of times in halt, I'll go up and, asking their permission, of course, put my hand inside their knee and thigh, and I'll say, squeeze my hand. And then I'll see, and if they go up a half an inch, I'll say, did you feel that? And they'll be like, oh, I went up a half an inch. Okay, so then I'll say, now squeeze my hand between your, the knee roll and your thigh, and now just stay down. Just stay down, just stay heavy. And so that seems to be really helpful for people to just feel the difference at halt. Okay, so I also like this metaphor of the rider's thighs like the prongs on an electrical plug, that you are sticking it into the electrical plug in the socket. That is how you are transferring energy down into the horse. You need to feel like you drop onto that horse with that same, like you are plugging in and that you're solidly there, that your thighs aren't going to float up or float off. You really have to get connected for the energy to flow. So then once you're connected, that's where eventually we develop the suppleness, right? So you're on there, and then you've got to figure out how to move like this. And that's just training those joints, the small muscles that surround the ball and socket joint getting strong, We have the piriformis, we have the gemellus, we have the gluteus medius, all these different things. And a lot of that is just practice, just doing it, and then your body eventually gets
Remembers.
better. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. I liked also to tell my students to imagine that there is no horse, that they are actually holding the saddle up in space, and it's their job to ride the saddle around.
That is a great metaphor. That is great.
I like
I like that.
So you have to grab the saddle, move it around, the horse will come with you. So that's been really helpful for some people to really be like, okay, I gotta get serious about this and sit down and hold on to myself. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you a picture of let's see, did I mark it? I hope, oh yes, I did, okay. Hold on. It's a picture of, I like to also tell the story of, so at the Spanish riding school, they do the airs above the ground, right? They do the capriole, the horse leaps and kicks. All right, so do you know that all of those are done without stirrups?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think is holding them on the horse?
It's fine.
It's their thighs. So yeah. So one of the things that eventually we practice is closing the thigh in downward transitions. And so one of the main reasons for that is that when you engage all of these muscles, it also stiffens your hip in a good way. So let's say I'm doing a trot halt, I'm riding the trot really deliberately, I'm moving my hips, I'm controlling the bounce. Whoa, I stop, I close my thigh, I bring my hips down, and I stop my hips. So the closing of the thigh muscles helps engage these muscles to stabilize the hips and stop them from getting bounced. So in the downward transitions, you're going to close your thigh more. The other place is later in collection, when your thighs almost act like a clutch. So you're coming up to the canter pirouette, you're swinging your hips, but then you close your thigh a little, like you're holding the brake just slightly, but
We had a
you keep
lesson like
swinging your
that.
hip.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You keep swinging your hip, and then the horse is like, oh, we're arresting the canter a little, but that comes later. So that's also when you're asking about more sophisticated aids with the thigh,
Okay.
that's an example of one. And then there can be, one-sided use of the thigh, say you're cantering to the right and you use your right thigh to pull you deeper into that bend, or you're bending your horse with your thigh bone more.
But that's different than when someone says, close your knees.
It is, because
Because
sometimes if you just
I've
say,
heard downward transition,
Yeah.
close your knees.
yeah,
But are we really closing our knees, or are we supposed to be closing our thigh?
it should be the whole wishbone of your seat. Again, we don't want to pinch with the knees, because if you just pinch with your knees, again, it draws your leg up.
Okay.
So just kind of keep thinking that you're just always using this whole wishbone shape of your seat and thigh, and that you want to close your whole thigh, again, because you're using those great strong femur bones and you're talking to the horse. So you don't want to just pinch your knees.
Okay.
You're just kind of cutting yourself off at the knee, haha.
Right.
In the sense that you're not using all the influence that you could have. And again, the other reason we're closing our thigh is because it stiffens the hip. So if we were just closing the knee to tell the horse to stop, that's almost like a spur stop or something, right? Where
Right.
it's almost like just an association. But if you're using the thigh, you're really thinking, okay, I'm connecting it to the rest of my seat. So the thighs help ground the rider's seat into the saddle, ensuring that the messages of the hips and the back get transmitted down through the saddle into the horse. The enigma for many riders is to realize that flexible, educated hips are the result of very controlled abdominal and back muscles. That's the enigma, because people see the flexibility here and they think it must be here, but it's not. This again is very controlled. Flexibility is literally, your ball and socket joints are low. They're way down here. They're not up here at your iliac crests. Okay, so just as a quick review, it's the stiffness of the back that propels the horse forward and engages the hind legs. We don't want to get caught riding from spur to hand or just using the lower leg. When we say riding from spur to hand, it's derogatory, and it means that you don't use your seat. It means you're just poking and pulling and poking and pulling. So we want to use our entire seat, the powerful lever of our thigh and hip and entire back. That's what creates a picture of harmony. The rider is swinging with the horse and making strong, short movements at the correct time, which are almost undetectable. That's where the illusion of effortlessness comes from. When you see a rider who looks like they're just sitting there, it's because they're so perfectly timed in harmony with the horse. The illusion of effortlessness can also be compared to watching a ballet from, 20 rows back in the theater. So you're watching the dance, God, it's beautiful, they just float in the air, it's just effortless, gorgeous.
Yeah.
You go backstage, they're sweating and heaving and their heart rate is through the roof and, you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea they're working so hard.
And if you sit up close, you hear it.
There you go.
You hear
Yes.
the lifts and the, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the fronts, yeah. So anyway,
Beautiful.
so I knew I was on the right track this past winter because I was showing a young horse to a potential buyer and she said, oh, he has an amazing canter, you are just sitting there. Oh gosh, okay, so we've talked about the rider's seat, we've talked about the special opportunity that canter presents us to engage the hindquarters, to shift the balance more onto the hind legs. But what exactly is that moment of suspension? We're going to take a second and go watch a short video
Cool.
that I have queued up of a horse's canter in slow motion, and we're going to talk about the exact timing of when to bring the hind end under. And when I say the hind legs, I mean also the horse's hip as well, that it's their whole, it's from their LS joint, just like us, that their whole pelvis. This is our favorite baseline exercise that we teach all of our horses. And pretty much as soon as my young horses can canter safely around the ring, they can canter on a circle, I can teach them this exercise. So, I generally put my horse on like a 15 to 18 meter circle. And the reason I'm being so specific is that I don't want a 20 meter circle. I don't want the person using the walls to turn their horse. Because of course, early on, it's really important that the horse respects the outside aids and that the person notices if that horse is veering right or left, right? So that if you put that horse on the track of a circle, I know nobody rides a perfect circle, but you shouldn't be pinging wall to wall. The horse should stay in the channel of the aids. If you're telling it to stay 8 feet off the walls, it should stay 8 feet off the walls. Okay, so I asked my horse to strike off in the canter. This can be, we can just say it's from trot, it's a green horse. So the first half of my circle is just a normal canter, right? I'm just saying, good boy, here we go, we're swinging the hips, we're together. Second half-ish of the circle is that I start to swing my hips harder and I probably squeeze a bit with my leg to tell that horse to go forward. And I'm using the timing that we discussed of the moment when the hind legs are coming under, the stifle is coming in front of the hip to bring the hind legs under. And I can tell when the horse answers me because I'll feel the stride lengthen and the horse will get lighter in the hand. That's really when you know that it's correct. So what we're doing there is we're teaching engagement, which is that the hind legs are coming further under the horse's body. So then the horse's legs are further into the horse's body. I can bring that horse back to trot, or I can start to teach it how to come to walk. But so then I'm also introducing the concepts of deceleration with the hind legs. Which is loading, and that leads to a shift of balance. So it sounds very, very simple, and in the beginning it's best described as like a small lengthening on the circle, but I'm doing it with my seat and a little bit of leg. I'm not lengthening the front of the horse's frame, I'm asking it to come from behind. So the horse is a quadruped, and in mechanics, if you decelerate a quadruped like a car, the mass falls to the front. So you got 4 wheels on the car, hit the brake, you feel yourself come against the seatbelt, right? You may have even felt this in your own horse when you make a downward transition and the horse lands in the reins, right? Okay, I think we've all felt that. So that inertia is carrying us forward. Horses are special because they are a quadruped, but we can teach them to decelerate with the hind legs. We can teach them to make a transition from here and land lightly, not pulling on the reins. So if you have made a transition and the horse did not pull on the reins, you probably decelerated your quadruped with the hind legs and the mass did not fall to the front. So a strong seat at the right time in canter that brings the hind legs under can teach the horse to be lighter in the hand. And like I said, that's one of the green flags about the exercise of engaging the canter on the circle, is if the horse becomes lighter in the hand as you add power. You're thinking, oh, okay, the mass is coming up. When we first swing the seat and ask the horse to engage more, sometimes the horse doesn't know and it leans down, right? It thinks, oh, I'm going to do this with my front legs and with my neck because that's natural, right? So you just, gently block them with the front and maybe you swing your seat a little harder. Maybe you just come down to the trot and then you try again. This takes a few days of practice, or for some horses, many months of practice. We just don't know. They're individuals and they learn just like people. So they're quick at some things, they're not so quick at the other things. But basically, you're just trying to show them over and over that when you activate the seat, you want them to activate the hind legs, not the front legs. And that's really another place where position is so important. Because let's say that I'm swinging my seat and I give the reins. What's that horse going to do? He's going to lengthen the frame with the front of his body. So when I'm swinging the seat for my horse, I'm not pulling at the same time, but I'm just not giving. I'm just blocking, right? So if the horse comes into my hand, I'm not worried. I don't pull hard on the horse, but neither do I give. And then I just repeat the exercise. But ideally, I swing my seat and the horse, I ride the withers up and the hind end under, and the horse gets lighter. And that's when you feel that wonderful softening in the hand, and that's how you know you've created, you're getting at the hind legs and you created an actual shift of balance back toward the hind legs. So, another way to think about this is that on my first level horse, I'm introducing second level concepts. Very, very early, but just the seeds of them. So I'm teaching it to engage the hind legs and decelerate with the hind legs, which is the walk, canter, walk, which is second level. And I'm laying the foundation of third level work, because someday I'll need to engage the hind legs more before flying change. So that's where the trainer is just thinking ahead. They're just putting these little pieces in there. They're teaching the horse these skills that are going to come into play later. Okay. And again, I do this on a 15 or 18 meter circle, not 20 meter circle, so the horse is respectful of the outside rein. The respect and obedience to the guiding outside rein and leg is also a distant cousin to the working pirouette work in the future. So that's another place where you're just planting this little seed. You're just laying a skill in there. So a few years ago, I read this wonderful article. I think it was in Dressage Today, and I really wish I would have kept it. But it was by someone, I think it was Sue Blinks, or an older Olympian who had gone to Germany to train. And she said that she went to this famous trainer and she spent 6 months cantering her horse on a circle. 6 months, trying to get her hips with the horse and teaching the horse to follow her hips. And she said it was the most valuable 6 months she'd ever spent.
Wow.
And I thought, that is amazing. And that is 100%, not that I think all of you need to go out and just spend 6 months on a circle. But I thought, yes, that is real skill building. And kudos to her for staying focused. I'm sure also she had a coach who was like, you're not getting off that circle, the German coach, until you can get that horse to follow your hips. But anyway, I love that story.
Maybe you're like 2 years.
Fine, it's not a race. It's not a race. So the last thing that I want to touch on before we wrap up is just one more advanced concept of the rider's seat and canter in regards to flying changes. So there's two schools of thought in flying changes. One is that the flying change is initiated with a strong leg aid, and the other is that the flying change and then the seat supports it, and then the other is that the flying change is initiated with a strong hip aid, and then the legs support that. So we prefer to initiate with the seat because by the time that you get to the flying changes, your horse also knows all of the lateral work. So a single leg aid means sideways. And that's often why people end up getting crooked flying changes. Because the horse knows a lot now, right? He knows to move over here, knows to move over here. So really the classical thinking about the rider's hips and the flying change is really that the rider's hips are connected to the horse's hips. And the flying change is made with a kind of a skipping motion, where one hip comes forward or the other hip comes forward. It's not a pushing over of the haunches with the lower leg, which can lead to crooked changes. So again, the classical straight change is initiated with the back, the seat, and the hips. And that's another place where the back has to stay really stiff, because if you're trying to shove your hip forward for flying change and you don't have strong abs, you're going to go over here, or you're going to go over here, or all different kinds of twisting. So that's just another place that goes back to the importance of the stiff back in the canter. So one more little thing on the back of your handouts, which is there's a picture of Paul's old stallion, Excelso. And this is just a great picture that shows engagement, because you can see that the horse's inside hind leg is coming all the way under the rider's hip.
Wow.
It's just a great illustration.
Wow.
That it's a good moment. This rider's sitting deeply. She's pressing her hip forward, but she's got her upper body in excellent alignment. and she's getting that horse to come under. So she could do different things at this moment. She could do a canter to walk transition, right? Because that hind leg is under there. She could just stop pushing and walk in lightly and you walk. Or she could swing it up harder and maybe do a working pirouette or something like that. So it's just a great